And now to talk a little bit more about our Battleground Tracker poll, Anthony Salvanto, CBS News Elections Director. Anthony, let's talk about social media. We talk about it all the time. Some of us live on it. But how much of a role is it playing and driving the conversation?
Yeah, and that's probably the central question of how people are getting messages and using this for the campaign now. We see the candidates clearly using it, going back and forth on it, our voters. So we decided, let's ask them. And, you know, we see pretty widespread Facebook use. About 4 in 10 voters across the 3 states that we were surveying are on Facebook and using it to follow the campaign, at least sometimes. And then Twitter, a little less, and we know that generally from use and from other surveys. Less than 1 in 10, sometimes about 1 in 10 who are on it. But what's really interesting, too, is that then we ask, well, what do you do on it? And by far and away, most people say that they read and consume on it, not necessarily posting, not necessarily composing their own things and tweeting and writing posts, which tells you a little bit that maybe they're taking in a lot of information, but the conversation is being driven by an even smaller group of committed people.
Right, and that's not too different than our political situation, which is to say that the activists are the ones who are super committed. They're out there engaging in conversation in the political cut and thrust, and they kind of drive the conversation just in general, even in participation in primaries and caucuses, right? Those are the super active, and then the other members of the party just kind of sit back and watch. They engage in the election at the end, but don't necessarily get as super. So in that sense, social media is driving the conversation the way regular conversation is driven. Tell me about who's using social media better. Is there anybody who's using it better than another candidate?
I think better is something we have to track over time, and that's one of our hopes in this. We'll keep following it, and we'll say, well, if they put this message out and you're receiving it, do we actually see movement in your vote? Mm-hmm. Right now, to your point, really, which is a good one, about whether or not it's reflective of the wider world, you know, you do see young people, let's start with the Democrats. Young people in the Democratic primaries are more for Bernie Sanders. Well, they also use social media more. They use Twitter more. And so you look at that voting pattern and you say people who use Twitter a lot are more for Bernie Sanders. And people who don't use Twitter at all are more for Hillary Clinton. They also happen to be a little bit older. So you can't necessarily separate those two things, the age and the use, and say that's causing that. But you can say that it's definitely a fact of demographics.
There was a report that Bernie Sanders spent $200,000 on a debate with Bernie hashtag promoting that idea on Twitter. Is that a useful way to spend money as a campaign?
Well, I think that the fact that he is after that younger demographic, that he is doing well with that younger demographic, this definitely shows you that they are at least receiving that message. They at least are there and they're monitoring it. You know, you look also on the Republican side where they don't use social media as much as Democrats do. So maybe it works on the Democratic side and less so on the Republican side. Mm-hmm. People who use it a lot, a little more for Trump than they are for Carson. But compared between the two parties, if you're trying to get a message out on social media, maybe more effective on the Democratic side.
Is the Democratic advantage on social media, maybe it's not an advantage, just use of social media, that much more than the Republicans? Because it was always considered the case that Barack Obama was the first social media candidate who really harnessed the power of social media. And so there was a great advantage that he had over his Republican competitors, even in 2012 when Romney saw that coming. Is there a great disparity between the two parties?
It's not enormous, but again, it depends on which voters you're trying to speak to. Mm-hmm. And to the sense that the Republicans, even before this campaign started, their internal memos, they said, well, we have to get younger. We have to reach a broader audience. So the impetus is really there for them to try, for them to push more onto that. And I think that's one of the interesting things we'll have to look at and track going forward is are they able to have that, and are they able to put that out there a great deal. But we also see, of course, like I said, Donald Trump is kind of dominating not just the polls, but among those social media users. Reflective or causal? That's something we have to watch.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you. A conversation that should be shared on social media about social media. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, John.